Ladies and gentlemen, if you enjoy my video, please click the like button and share the video. It is the only way the YouTube algorithms really notices me. I will be very grateful to you. The House on the Hill hides a dark past. Scary story published by Scare Fiction. Read for you by Scare Fiction. Chapter 1. The Return. The winding road leading to the small town of Ashford was suffocatingly narrow, flanked by dense woods that seemed to close in with every mile. Emily Carson gripped the steering wheel tighter, her knuckles turning white. The GPS on her phone flickered uncertainly, as if even technology hesitated to guide her to her destination. The house on the hill was a legend in Ashford. People whispered about it in hushed tones, their eyes darting nervously when the subject came up. Emily hadn't set foot in this town since she was a child, but the memories were hazy, more shadows than substance. Her mother had always refused to speak about the family home, and her father, well, he was long gone, another ghost of her past. The car jolted as it hit a pothole, snapping Emily out of her thoughts. She could see it now, the house. Perched atop the hill like a vulture, it cast a long shadow over the town below. The locals called it the Carson Curse, a place of death and despair. But to Emily, it was an enigma, a link to a past that had been deliberately buried. She parked at the base of the hill, the engine sputtering to a stop as if relieved to have survived the journey. Stepping out of the car, she took a deep breath. The air was thick with the scent of rain and decaying leaves. Above her, dark clouds gathered, their ominous presence mirroring the knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. As she trudged up the hill, overgrown weeds tugged at her legs like desperate hands. The house loomed larger with every step, its broken windows staring down at her like empty, accusing eyes. The front door was ajar, creaking slightly in the wind, as if inviting her in or warning her to stay away. Emily hesitated at the threshold. The wood beneath her feet groaned in protest as she crossed into the foyer. The air inside was frigid, far colder than it should have been for a late autumn evening. She pulled her coat tighter around her, her breath visible in the dim light filtering through the cracked windows. Dust coated every surface, thick enough to suggest the house hadn't been touched in years. As she moved deeper into the house, the floorboards creaked beneath her, the sound echoing in the vast emptiness. The walls were lined with peeling wallpaper, the pattern barely visible beneath layers of grime. But what caught her attention were the carvings, intricate, almost ancient symbols etched into the wood. They spiraled up the walls, converging on the ceiling in a pattern that made her uneasy. Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. It wasn't just the cold. It was the house itself, alive with an energy that she couldn't quite explain. Old, dusty photographs hung askew on the walls, their subjects' eyes following her as she moved through the hall. She paused in front of one, a portrait of a woman who looked eerily familiar. The resemblance to Emily was uncanny, as though she were looking at an older version of herself. The storm outside intensified, lightning illuminating the house in brief, blinding flashes. Emily tore her eyes away from the photograph and forced herself to move forward, deeper into the shadows. She needed answers about her aunt, her family, and the secrets this house had guarded for generations. But as she reached for the handle of a door at the end of the hall, a cold wind whipped through the house, slamming the door shut with a deafening bang. The photographs rattled on the walls, and a low, groaning noise echoed from deep within the house, as if the very foundation was shifting beneath her. Emily's heart raced. She was no longer sure if the house was merely old or if it was angry. Chapter 2. Echoes of the Past. Emily awoke with a jolt, the remnants of a nightmare still clinging to her. The house was unnervingly quiet, the storm from the previous night now just a faint memory. But the uneasy feeling that had settled over her, upon her arrival, had only intensified. Determined to make sense of the eerie atmosphere, Emily decided to explore the house. She began in the dusty, dimly lit living room. A stack of old letters caught her eye, their yellowed pages tied together with a fraying ribbon. She untied the bundle and began to read, her eyes narrowing as the contents revealed a side of her aunt she'd never known: paranoia, fear, and a deep obsession with the house's history. The letters hinted at something terrible that had happened long ago, a tragedy involving their family that had been buried by time. Emily moved on. Her curiosity piqued. The house seemed to groan in protest as she climbed the stairs to the attic. The door creaked open, revealing a room filled with forgotten relics, dusty trunks, old furniture draped in white sheets, and cobwebs thick enough to choke on. In one corner, she found a chest filled with photographs, brittle with age. The faces staring back at her were unfamiliar, yet something in their eyes made her shiver. Among them, she found a diary bound in cracked leather, its pages filled with the frantic handwriting of a woman driven mad by fear. As she read, Emily's breath caught in her throat. The entries spoke of strange occurrences, whispers in the night, shadows moving on their own, and a sense of being watched. Her aunt had been convinced that something malevolent was tied to the house, something that had claimed the lives of their ancestors. Leaving the attic, Emily descended into the basement. The air grew colder with each step, and the faint smell of damp earth permeated the air. The basement was a stark contrast to the rest of the house, bare, with walls marked by strange symbols that seemed to pulse in the dim light. Emily felt a wave of nausea as she tried to decipher them, the symbols twisting and shifting before her eyes. She stumbled back, her head spinning. Was it the cold, the darkness, or something else playing tricks on her mind? A locked door at the far end of the basement caught her attention, its surface scarred and scratched, as though someone or something had tried to claw its way out. No matter how hard she tried, the door wouldn't budge. That night, the dreams returned, more vivid than before. She saw her ancestors, their faces twisted in terror, their mouths open in silent screams. She awoke, drenched in sweat, the echo of their cries still ringing in her ears. The line between reality and nightmare began to blur. The next day, Emily ventured into town, desperate for answers. But the townspeople were different, now distant, cold, their eyes filled with a mix of fear and disdain. Conversations were cut short, doors slammed in her face. It was as if her presence had awakened something they'd long hoped was forgotten. As the shadows in the house grew longer, Emily realized she was no longer just uncovering her family's dark past. She was becoming a part of it. Chapter 3: The Unseen Watcher. The following night, Emily sat in the dimly lit living room, her eyes scanning the pages of her aunt's diary. Each entry was more frantic than the last, a descent into madness that mirrored the growing tension in the house. The words seemed to crawl across the page, twisting and distorting, until Emily could barely understand them. She slammed the diary shut, her heart racing. The house was suffocating her, its oppressive atmosphere weighing down on her like a shroud. As she rose to her feet, a loud crash echoed through the house. The sound reverberated through the walls, rattling the dusty picture frames and making Emily's blood run cold. She rushed to the source of the noise, the kitchen. There, she found the once neatly arranged chairs scattered across the room as if they had been violently thrown. The cabinets were wide open, dishes shattered on the floor. Emily's hands shook as she backed out of the room, her mind struggling to rationalize what she had just seen. She retreated upstairs, hoping to find solace in her bedroom, but the feeling of being watched grew stronger with every step. The air around her grew cold, a chill that seeped into her bones. She glanced over her shoulder, and for a split second, She saw it, a shadowy figure lurking in the corner of her vision. It was gone as soon as she turned to face it, leaving her heart pounding in her chest. Desperate to prove to herself that she wasn't losing her mind, Emily began searching the house for any explanation. In her frantic exploration, she stumbled upon a loose panel in the wall behind an old, dusty bookshelf. Her hands trembled as she pried it open, revealing a narrow passageway hidden within the walls. The passage led to a small, secret room. Inside, the temperature dropped even further, and the musty scent of decay hung heavy in the air. The walls were covered in faded, peeling wallpaper, but beneath the decay, Emily could make out symbols similar to those she'd seen in the basement. In the center of the room stood a single object, a portrait of a woman who looked almost identical to Emily. The woman's eyes seemed to follow her, the expression on her face a mixture of fear and malice. Emily stepped back, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The room felt wrong, as if it was suffused with the lingering presence of something malevolent. The shadowy figure had been there, she was sure of it. And now, it felt closer than ever. As she fled the room, the lights in the house flickered, casting long, twisting shadows across the walls. The doors slammed shut behind her, one after the other, as if the house itself was trying to trap her inside. The temperature plummeted, her breath visible in the cold air, and she could hear it, the soft whisper of her name carried on the wind, growing louder with each passing moment. Emily's fear reached a fever pitch. She raced through the darkened corridors, the feeling of eyes on her back unbearable. The house was alive, and it was watching her. She couldn't shake the sensation that she was not only being observed, but pursued. By the time she reached her bedroom, she was trembling. The room offered no comfort. It felt more like a prison. She slammed the door behind her, pressing her back against it, as if to keep whatever was out there at bay. But deep down, she knew that no door could keep out what was already inside. As she collapsed onto the bed, the whispers finally ceased. But the silence that followed was far more terrifying. In the darkness, Emily could feel the presence closing in, the unseen watcher who had claimed her aunt and now had its sights set on her. Chapter 4: Secrets Unearthed. Emily didn't sleep. The dawn's first light did little to chase away the darkness that had settled in her mind. The house, once merely unsettling, had become a labyrinth of terror, with every corner hiding a new nightmare. The bruises on her arms, forming in the shape of handprints, were proof that something had crossed the line from shadows in her mind to a tangible force. She needed answers. The suffocating dread in the house made it impossible to stay inside, so she grabbed her coat and hurried into town, her breath still ragged from the night's ordeal. The town was deceptively peaceful, the sun shining over tidy streets and friendly faces. But Emily could feel the weight of its secrets, lurking just beneath the surface. The library was her refuge. It was a quaint building, with rows of neatly stacked books and the comforting smell of old paper. But as she approached the archive section, the air seemed to thicken with the same oppressive weight she felt in the house. The librarian, a stooped old woman with sharp eyes, watched her with an unreadable expression as she requested the oldest town records. Emily's heart pounded as she flipped through the yellowed pages of the town's history. The founding families, including her own, were revered in every other record, praised for their contributions to the town's prosperity. But buried among the mundane entries were whispers of something darker, a pact made in the shadows, sealed with blood and ritual. Her ancestors, along with the other founding families, had ensured the town's survival through unspeakable acts, trading the souls of their kin for wealth and power. The more Emily uncovered, the more the pieces fell into place. The house wasn't just a relic of the past, it was a monument to those twisted deeds. Her family had been the gatekeepers of the dark secret, and now it seemed that responsibility had fallen to her. As she delved deeper, a name kept appearing: Margaret Carson, her great-grandmother, a woman known for her involvement in the rituals. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. Portrait in the hidden room wasn't just a resemblance, it was Margaret herself. The pact was more than a myth. It was a curse, one that had taken root in the house and was now seeking to claim her. Returning to the house, Emily felt the shift in its energy immediately. The air was colder, the shadows darker. The house was reacting to her discoveries, and it wasn't pleased. As she stepped inside, the door slammed shut behind her, and she could feel the malevolence closing in. Desperation clawed at her chest. She needed to leave, but every attempt was thwarted. The windows wouldn't budge, the locks on the doors twisted and jammed. The shadowy figure that had lurked in the corners was now more aggressive, its presence tangible in the scratches that appeared on her skin, the objects flung across the room, and the oppressive weight on her chest as she tried to breathe. The boundaries between reality and nightmare blurred. Even in the daylight, the house was shrouded in darkness, a living entity that seemed determined to keep her there. Emily's sanity frayed as she realized the truth. She was trapped, just as her ancestors had been, bound by the sins of the past. And the house, with its unseen watcher, would not let her go easily. Chapter 5: The Descent. Emily's world had become a maze of dark corridors and twisted memories. The house on the hill no longer felt like a place bound by the physical world. It was a living, breathing nightmare that responded to her every thought, every fear. The discovery of her great-grandmother's pact had left her reeling, but it was the journal she found in the hidden room that pushed her over the edge. The journal was tucked away in a crevice behind the disturbing portrait of Margaret Carson. It was old, the pages brittle and stained, filled with her aunt's handwriting, erratic, barely legible scrawls that spoke of paranoia and terror. Each entry was a desperate plea, an attempt to document the horrors she had experienced. The Watcher, always lurking, always watching. Emily's hands trembled as she read the fragmented thoughts, her aunt's voice echoing in her mind, merging with her own growing fear. The more Emily read, the more she felt her own sanity slipping away. The words blurred together, twisting into nightmarish visions of shadowy figures, blood rituals, and a family cursed for eternity. The house seemed to pulse with malevolence, the shadows deepening, the walls pressing in as if the very structure was alive and hungry. Driven by an obsession to understand the dark legacy that had claimed her family, Emily spent hours in the hidden room, surrounded by the remnants of her ancestors' occult practices. The symbols on the walls, the relics of ancient rituals, they all pointed to something far darker than she had imagined. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the oppressive weight of the house bore down on her, distorting her perception of reality. Days bled into nights, and time lost all meaning. The house played tricks on her. Rooms shifted, hallways extended into impossible distances, and mirrors reflected scenes that didn't exist. Emily would enter the living room, only to find herself back in the hidden room, the portrait of Margaret Carson glaring down at her with malevolent intent. The sense of dread was all-consuming, every creak of the floorboards and whisper of the wind, sending her heart into a frenzy. Emily knew she should leave, but the compulsion to uncover the truth kept her rooted in place. The Watcher was no longer just a presence in the corner of her vision. It was everywhere. She could feel its breath on her neck, its hands on her shoulders, its whispers in her ear, urging her deeper into the madness. The lines between her thoughts and those of the Watcher blurred, her mind fragmenting under the weight of the house's influence. Sleep became a distant memory, replaced by feverish bouts of research and frantic scribbling in the margins of her aunt's journal. But the more she wrote, the less sense it made. The entries became as fragmented as those of her aunt, the words twisting into spirals of despair and hopelessness. The house was breaking her, just as it had broken her family before her. Emily's grip on reality slipped further with each passing hour. The Watcher's presence grew stronger, its influence almost physical. The air around her thickened, pressing down on her chest until she struggled to breathe. The walls of the hidden room seemed to close in, the symbols on the walls writhing as if alive, taunting her with the knowledge she could never fully grasp. There was no escape. The house had claimed her, just as it had claimed those before her. Emily was no longer sure where the house ended and she began. The Watcher was inside her mind, guiding her hand, twisting her thoughts. And with each revelation, each new piece of the puzzle, Emily descended further into the abyss, the darkness of the house swallowing her whole. Chapter 6. The Breaking Point. The air in the house thickened, pressing against Emily's lungs as she stumbled through the endless maze of hallways. The walls seemed to close in on her, warping and shifting with each step. Panic clawed at her throat as she realized every turn led her back to the same spot. The hidden room with the portrait of Margaret Carson looming above her. The Watcher's presence was no longer just a whisper in the dark. Emily's breath came in ragged gasps as she tried to find a way out. She threw open doors only to find brick walls behind them, windows that should have led outside, revealing nothing but black voids. The house had become a living nightmare, a twisted reflection of her deepest fears. The temperature plummeted, her breath fogging in front of her as she shivered uncontrollably. The lights flickered, casting eerie shadows that seemed to move on their own. Desperation surged through her as she sprinted down a corridor, only to find herself back in the hidden room once again. The Watcher's eyes followed her from every dark corner, its presence pressing down on her like a vise. Emily screamed in frustration, pounding her fists against the walls, but the house absorbed her cries, mocking her with its silence. "I won't let you win," she shouted into the suffocating darkness, her voice cracking with fear and fury. The Watcher responded with a low, guttural growl that reverberated through the house, shaking the very foundations. The walls groaned and shifted, the floor buckling beneath her feet as the house seemed to come alive, twisting into shapes that defied logic and reason. Emily staggered backward, her heart pounding as the Watcher's form materialized in front of her. It was no longer just a shadowy figure lurking at the edges of her vision. The Watcher was real, its form towering over her, a grotesque amalgamation of darkness and despair. Its eyes burned with an otherworldly fire, its twisted mouth curling into a smile that sent ice through her veins. The stench of decay filled the air, making her gag as she tried to back away. "What do you want from me?" Emily demanded, her voice trembling with fear as she faced the creature. The Watcher's voice slithered into her mind, bypassing her ears, a voice that was both ancient and eternal. "You are the last, the final heir of your family's sins. The pact must be fulfilled, or the curse shall consume all." Emily's mind reeled as the truth crashed down on her. Her ancestors had made a pact, a bargain for power and prosperity that had cursed them for generations. And now it was her turn to pay the price. The Watcher leaned closer, its breath cold against her skin, its eyes boring into her soul. "No," Emily screamed, refusing to accept the fate that had been forced upon her. "I won't continue this curse." The Watcher laughed, a sound that echoed through the halls, shaking the house to its core. "You have no choice. The pact binds you. Unless..." Emily's breath hitched as the Watcher paused, its smile widening. "Unless what?" she whispered, clutching onto the sliver of hope that dangled before her. "Unless you can break the curse, release the souls trapped by your family's greed." "But know this," the Watcher hissed, its voice dripping with malice. Failure will doom you, and those you love, to eternal torment. The house groaned, the walls closing in around her, the watcher's form growing ever larger, ever more terrifying. Emily's heart raced as she realized she had to find a way to break the curse. But how? The house offered no answers, only endless terror and despair. With every ounce of strength she had left, Emily made a silent vow. She would find a way to end the curse, to free herself from the chains that bound her family to this nightmare. But the watcher's eyes gleamed with cruel anticipation, as if it knew the battle was far from over. Chapter 7. The Ritual. The air in the hidden room was thick with an ancient, oppressive energy that made every breath a struggle. Emily stood in the center of the room, her eyes scanning the walls covered in pulsating symbols that seemed to glow with malevolent intent. The watcher hovered nearby, its presence a constant pressure at the back of her mind, pushing her toward the dark ritual that had bound it to this cursed house for centuries. On the floor in front of her lay the tools of the ritual candles, a ceremonial knife, and a faded, crumbling book filled with incantations in a language long forgotten by time. Emily's hands trembled as she reached for the book. She knew what she had to do, but the price was almost too much to bear. The ritual to break the curse required a sacrifice, something precious, something that held a piece of her soul. The watcher's eyes burned into her, its voice slithering into her thoughts. You cannot escape your fate, Emily. The curse must be fulfilled, or you will suffer as your ancestors did. Give in, and you will be free. Emily closed her eyes, trying to block out the watcher's insidious whispers. Visions of her aunt's last moments flooded her mind. Margaret Carson, alone in this very room, her face twisted in terror as she tried to escape the same fate. But the house had taken her, just as it had taken all those before her. Emily could feel the weight of their despair pressing down on her, urging her to complete the ritual, to end the cycle of torment. But she hesitated. The sacrifice required was not just a token. It was something that held her heart, something that defined her very existence. The watcher showed her images of her past, her mother's locket, her childhood memories, everything that had given her strength and hope in her darkest times. The locket, now heavy in her hand, was all she had left of her mother, a tangible connection to the love she had lost. To give it up would be to sever that bond forever. Do it, Emily, the watcher urged, its voice growing more insistent. End this, and you will be free. Emily's heart pounded in her chest, her mind racing. Could she truly give up the last piece of her mother, the one thing that had kept her grounded through all the horrors she had faced? But if she didn't, the curse would continue, and she would be trapped in this house, just as her aunt had been, doomed to a fate worse than death. The symbols on the walls pulsed faster, the air thick with the sound of whispers and distant cries. The house seemed to close in around her, its very structure groaning under the weight of the curse. Emily knew she was running out of time. With a deep breath, she placed the locket in the center of the ritual circle, her hands shaking as she picked up the ceremonial knife. The watcher loomed closer, its eyes fixed on the locket, waiting for the moment the ritual would begin. Emily's heart broke as she raised the knife, tears streaming down her face. She could almost hear her mother's voice, comforting her in the darkest moments of her childhood. And it took every ounce of her strength not to pull back. But the lives of countless souls, including her own, depended on her decision. With a cry of anguish, she brought the knife down, cutting through the last tie to her past. The locket shattered, its fragments glowing with an eerie light as the symbols on the walls flared to life, burning with a furious intensity. The room shook violently, the ground splitting open as a deafening roar filled the air. The watcher screamed, its form dissolving into the darkness as the ritual took hold, the curse unraveling at last. Emily fell to her knees, the weight of her sacrifice crashing down on her as the house began to collapse around her. She had done it. She had broken the curse, but the cost had been more than she could ever have imagined. Chapter 8. The Final Reckoning. The room quaked violently, the very air crackling with malevolent energy as Emily stood at the heart of the storm. The ritual was in motion, the shattered locket's fragments glowing with an unearthly light, casting grotesque shadows that danced across the crumbling walls. The Watcher, now fully revealed, towered over her, a mass of darkness with eyes that burned like embers in a dying fire. Its presence was overwhelming, a tangible force that pressed down on her soul, threatening to crush her under the weight of centuries-old rage. "You think you can defy me, child?" The Watcher's voice echoed in her mind, a chorus of tortured souls twisted into one. "Your blood is tainted with the sins of your ancestors. You cannot escape what you are destined to become." Emily's hands shook as she clutched the ceremonial knife, the last weapon she had against the entity that had tormented her family for generations. The ground beneath her feet shifted, splitting open to reveal a chasm of darkness that seemed to stretch into infinity. The walls of the hidden room crumbled, revealing the skeletal remains of those who had come before her, their empty eye sockets staring accusingly, as if to remind her of the blood that stained her family's legacy. The house was coming apart at the seams, the very foundation of its cursed existence, unraveling as the ritual reached its peak. Emily could feel the pull of the abyss beneath her, the house itself trying to drag her down into the darkness. But she wasn't ready to give in. Not yet. "You don't own me," Emily whispered, her voice trembling but resolute. "I'm not my ancestors. I won't let you win." The Watcher roared, a sound that shook the entire house to its core. The spirits trapped within the walls wailed in unison, their cries filling the air as they tried to pull her down with them. But Emily fought back, using the knowledge she had gained from her aunt's journal and the ancient texts she had found. She recited the counter-ritual, her voice growing stronger with each word, defying the darkness that threatened to consume her. The Watcher lunged at her, its form shifting and expanding, tendrils of shadow reaching out to ensnare her. But Emily didn't waver. She plunged the knife into the ground, at the center of the ritual circle, and screamed the final incantation. The reaction was immediate and violent. A shockwave erupted from the point where the knife met the earth, tearing through the room with the force of a hurricane. The Watcher shrieked, its form disintegrating as the light from the locket's fragments intensified, consuming the darkness that had long held the house in its grip. The walls collapsed in on themselves. The ground shook with a thunderous roar, and the spirits were pulled into the abyss, their tortured souls finally finding release. Emily was thrown back, landing hard against the rubble as the house began to collapse around her. She could barely see through the dust and debris, but she knew somehow. She knew that she had won. The curse was broken. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, Emily crawled from the ruins, her body battered and her spirit weary. The house was gone, reduced to nothing more than a pile of rubble, its oppressive presence lifted at last. But the cost had been high. She had sacrificed everything, and though she had survived, she knew she would never be the same. She stood at the edge of the ruins, watching as the sunlight bathed the town in a soft golden glow. The darkness was gone, but the echoes of the past lingered, a reminder of the horrors she had faced and the strength it had taken to overcome them. Emily turned away, knowing she could never truly leave the memories behind, but also knowing she had done what needed to be done. The cycle was broken. The town was free. But as she walked away, a chill ran down her spine, and she couldn't shake the feeling that the darkness might still be out there, waiting.